Hello everyone and welcome to this Q&A for Striking Balance 2022. Today we're going to talk about some common questions for the implementation of Weavy and Wishbone. I'm Joanna Joel, Technology Advocate at Weavy, and with me I've got Dave, who is the Director of Onboarding at Weavy, and Joel Parks, who is the Junior Product Manager over at Wishbone. Before I let Joel take the stage, I'd like to tell you about our referral program. By referring a friend or colleague to join the hackathon, you will get a free Udemy course worth up to $20. You can find the referral page over at the platform, and when your friend registers a team and enters the code that is sent to them, you will get the reward. With that out of the way, Joel, can you tell us a little bit about some common questions for Wishmo?
All right, thanks, Joanna, for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Joel. I'm the Junior Product Manager for Wishmo, and I'm going to be going over the process of showing you guys how to install Wishmo into your application, include the CSS files, as well as instantiate a few of our controls. So the first thing I'm going to go over is the installation process. So here we've got our using Wishmo in Pure.js documentation page. We've got documentation pages for each of the major web frameworks, so JavaScript, Angular, React, and Vue. Now these pages will all explain how to install Wishmo in each of these different frameworks. We're just going to be focusing on the JavaScript for now. And you have two different options on how to install this. You can either install it via the download from Wishmo's website, grapecity.com/Wishmo, or, and this is how I typically recommend people install our controls, is via NPM. So for installing the JavaScript controls, that would be this line here, npm install at grapecity/wishmo.purejs.all. Now, if you're using a different framework such as Angular 2, you're going to replace this Pure.js line in the middle with the framework that you're using. So Angular 2 or React or Vue. And that will install the correct framework relevant files to your application. Now, once those are installed, the next thing that you're going to want to do is actually tie the Wishmo control to a host element on your page. So the way that we do that in JavaScript is we set a div with an ID. Here, it's going to be host element. And then in our JavaScript files, we're going to import the appropriate files that we're going to use. So for this, we're just creating a flex grid. So we're going to use the WJC grid, or we're going to import all of the files from this wishmo.grid module as this WJC grid variable. And then from there, we're going to create a new variable. We're just going to call it grid, and we're going to set this equal to WJC grid.flexgrid. And by default, we do need to pass this flexgrid class an argument. In this case, what we pass it is the host element that we want it tied to. So in this case, the div with the ID host element is what we want this tied to. So we're just passing hashtag host element here. And then if you're writing code using ES5, you can also use require instead of import. So the only difference here would be instead of import star as WJC grid, we're just setting var WJC grid equal to require at grapecity/wishmo.grid. And then finally, once you have the control instantiated, the only other thing that we need to do from here is import our CSS. The default CSS file is right here. So all you would do is paste this at the top of your CSS file. So import at grapecity/wishmo.styles/wishmo.css. And this will import the core CSS files and will stylize Wishmo's controls using the base styling packages. Now that we've gone over the actual process of installing Wishmo into your application, we're going to hop over and take a quick look at a few live examples. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is just a basic collection view in JavaScript. So if we open up, as we can see here on the left-hand side, we've got our running code, and then on the right-hand side, we've got our code files. So we open up the index.html. You can see that we've got this div down here. This just got ID set to the grid. And we come over here to this app.js file. So you can see here we're setting the Wijmo CSS. We're importing a couple files from the Wijmo and Wijmo.grid modules. So in the previous example, we showed importing star as WJC grid. This will import all of the modules from this Wijmo.grid file. If we only want to import a specific file, for example, in this case, FlexGrid, we can use curly braces here and then just directly name the module that we want to import instead of importing all of them simultaneously. From there, we are just going to create some mock data in this sample. So as you can see here, we're just creating an array of objects, and each object has an ID, country, sales, and expenses property. Typically, you'd be reading this from a database, but for the purposes of this sample, we're just generating the data in the code. And then finally, we're going to create the control itself. So as I showed in the previous example, we're creating this variable and we're setting it to a flex grid, and we're passing the element that we want to serve as the host element for the grid to the grid. We're also passing a few other properties here. So along with passing the host element, FlexGrid also accepts an object, and these objects this object can have a couple properties defined on it, and that'll define exactly how the control renders. So we don't want the grid to auto-generate the columns based on the data that we put through. We want to manually generate those columns ourselves. So we're going to set auto-generate columns to false. And we're going to create a columns array here. And this is what's going to define the columns that we display. So the properties that we had on each object is ID, country, sales, and expenses. For this sample, we're going to avoid displaying the ID. Instead, we're just going to display the country, the sales, and the expenses. So the columns array is an array of objects. Each of these objects can have a few different properties. The ones that that we're going to set are the binding property, the header property, and then the width property. So the binding property is the name of the property that we're binding to this column. The header is the name of the column that's going to go inside of its header cell. And then the width is how long each of these columns actually are. And then one other thing I forgot to mention, for the sales and expenses, we're also setting this format option. This format option is just going to display, tell the application how we want to display each of the numbers. So for example, N2 is just numbered to the 2 decimal places. If I change this to C2 and I go ahead and run this, you can see that instead of just showing numbers to the 2 decimal places, it's showing currency values. And then the final thing that we need to do is actually set the data itself on our FlexGrid. So we are pushing this data into a variable that we're just calling data. We can take that array and we can set it directly to the item source property. Now what that's going to do is it's going to take our array, it's going to push it onto a collection view object. Now what collection views do is they manage the data in the background for each of Wijmo's controls. And then that collection view is going to get used to display each of the data points in your data set. That's the basics for creating and initializing a Wijmo FlexGrid. 2 other points I really just wanted to go over are the input and the chart controls, since those are 2 of our other popular controls. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just a brief combo box overview. The combo box is Wijmo's drop-down input element, our core drop-down input element. We do have a couple other offers in terms of components, but this is the core drop-down control we offer. Like with FlexGrid, we need to import both the style, the CSS file, the styles, as well as, in this case, we're importing the core Wijmo file, so at grapecity.com or at grapecity/Wijmo, and we're setting this to the Wijmo variable. And then we're also importing Wijmo's input files using at grapecity/Wijmo.input, and we're setting those equal to this input variable. And then finally, instead of having the data directly in our JavaScript file, we have that in a separate file, and we are importing that into this using the get countries and the get data methods. Now, if we hop down, we can see that in two spots right here, we're initializing combo boxes. I'm just going to be going over the first initialization, a list going off a list of strings, or in this case, a list of countries using this this get country method, which will simply return an array of strings. So we are initializing our combo box. We're just calling it the combo string, since this is going to hold an array of strings. Just like with FlexGrid, we are creating a new control here. We're using the input variable that we created up above, so input.combobox. We are passing the host element to it. We are passing its item source here, so in this case, the method getCountries. And then we are also tying an event to this control. Now, Wijmo offers various different points in which developers can tie methods to events in each of the controls. This is just an example of one of those. So this is selected index changed. So whenever the index for this control changes, we will then, this method will get called and will run. So for example, for the strings array here, we're using the selected index change to set the current value of the value here, what's being displayed. So we'll open this drop down. We'll scroll down and we'll click on Italy. And as you can see here, the selected index changed event got fired, and we updated the value here from China to Italy. That's the basics of going with a combo box. And this extends to really any of Wijmo's input controls. One last thing to touch on is Wijmo's chart controls. This is the other large library that a lot of our developers use. So I'm just going to go over a basic column chart here. So just like FlexGrid, this accepts an array of data. This data can either be a basic array or it can be a collection view. If you provide a collection, a basic array, the Wijmo controls will behind the scenes create its own collection view to manage this data. But just like FlexGrid, this is very simple. We're importing the Wijmo.chart files here into our chart variable. And then we also want to include some animations. Wijmo has an animation library, so we're going to do the same thing with Wijmo.chart animations here. And finally is the actual process of initializing the control. Just like our input, just like our FlexGrid, we create a new instance of that control here. We will pass it the host element that it's going to get tied to, and then we can set a couple properties here. So we're setting the header here, which in this case is country GDP. The legend object, we are setting its position to the bottom. So as you can see here, it's displaying on the bottom of the screen. And then finally, we are setting our bindings. So we are binding the x-axis to the country value. And then we are defining the series here. So we have 3 series here, each of them based off of a different year, 2014, 2015, and 2016. So we define what they're going to be bound to, as well as the name of that series. And then From there, we can pass the data here using our get data method. Like in the previous example, this just retrieves an array of data and sets it to the item source. One other thing to mention, by default, Wijmo's charts have use a default palette. You can set your own custom color palette if you wish by just simply setting this palette property and passing an array of strings that contain RGBA values. So that's how you go about both including Wijmo in your application, as well as including a chart, a grid, and one of our input controls, and including Wijmo's CSS files.
Thank you, Joel, for explaining about Wishmo. I'm sure that was very helpful to many of our viewers. Now let's take a look at Weavy with Dave. Welcome to the stage.
Hey, thank you. Happy to be here. I just flew in, and boy, are my arms tired. No, obviously, I'm not. I didn't go anywhere for this. Love the internet. But yeah, I'm gonna go over some of the FAQs that we get often at Weavy that have come up already for some participants, and hopefully this can provide some clarification. And just wanted to say that you can always reach out, Dave at Weavy.com, if you have any questions that come up during this implementation process. So I would have to say that the most common question we get from the get-go is, do I like, you have an app and you have users already within your app, and then we always get, do I have to have a user within Weavy? And the answer is yes. Weavy is always going to be a separate back end, so you're always going to have your own application and then a Weavy server, which is separate, whether we host it for you or you're hosting it yourself. So that's one question we typically get a lot. So wanted to run that down a little bit and how you create a user within Weavy, because that is the next common question. So being that Weavy is a separate server, again, you'll have to have that user in Weavy just like you have it in your app. So syncing them up is very important. So the way to do that is to use your API key that you get from Weavy to make a server-to-server call. So if you go to our doc site, weavy.com/docs, you can take a look at how to do that under the web API. It'll go over a few different examples. This is the user example here. So you can simply pass in that API key as a bearer token that you have for that server-to-server call. Now, it's very important that these calls, since they're using your API key, are directly from your server to the Weavy server itself. You don't want to send that information to the client side at all. For that, you'll be sending the access token that you get for the user. So if you were to use this authentication call for a user, and you were to get that authentication access token, you then would send that back to the client side from your back end. So right here is that post call. You would put the base URL for your Weavy server, and then the rest of it, the API/users, and then you're going to have the unique ID of the user you would like to get the access token from. So this is going to create the user or grab the user if it already exists in the Weavy server by that unique identifier here, user1, and then get the token and respond with an access token. So therefore, your server will call Weavy will pass back this access token, then your server will pass back that user's access token. So the only thing the user will ever see on the client side is their access token. They only have their user rights. So that is a very common question we get. Then the next question we get, because folks want to typically ask, say, hey, Dave, can we programmatically send a message in the chat, maybe on behalf of like a bot or something like that? And you can absolutely do that. And that is using our API. So while we're here under the web API, we can take a look at how that server to server communication would work. And you can take a look at our open API description for the time being. Now, this is going to be something that I would recommend opening in Postman. And another question we get is, how do we do that? Not everyone's familiar with Open API, because if you go here and you see the latest version of the Weavy Open API, of course, we see some JSON, but it's not the easiest to read. So what I like to do is copy this URL, open Postman, and then go to import under APIs, and then you can just go ahead and put a link in there right here. Go ahead, continue, and import it. You name it whatever you'd like. You see I've done this a few times with the Weavy API. Over here, and it just takes a moment. Then you will have this in your collection. So if you go to your collections, you will see the Weavy API in a more readable, format. It's a little bit easier to go with. And the great thing is you can also go ahead and under the Weavy API, you can add in your variables here if you'd like, your base URL, all that stuff, and it's already populated throughout this whole entire collection, and you're able to then put in the tokens and make calls and use the API key to see how those calls would work. So then you would find the conversations, and you can create a conversation between folks, or you can go ahead and update a message or get a message or delete a message or even create a message, right? You're able to do these types of things with this type of API call. So yes, you can definitely do that. Now the other portion I wanted to chat about that we always get questions around is what directories are. So Weavy has a concept of directories, and essentially what that does is separates users. So if you have a group of users in your app that can communicate with one another for chat, for example, they should all be in the same directory. They'll be able to talk to each other just out of the gate. So if the app is designed to have different organizations in it, there'll be different directories for each organization, and then all the users that are part of, say, directory A can communicate with one another. All the users that are part of directory B can communicate with one another, and they won't know the other users exist in the Weavy server when they go to chat with somebody. They'll just see the list of users that are in the same directory as them. Along those lines, the other question we get is, well, what if we want someone from directory A to communicate with someone from directory B? How could we do that? That is definitely possible. There are a couple of ways to go about it. Really depends on what you would like to do. But the easiest way is to use the API to programmatically create, if it's going to be a chat, like a chat or a conversation between those other two users, and that kind of opens the doorway for them. So they'll be able to have conversations. So one user from directory A and another user from directory B will have a conversation created, and they'll be able to see each other and chat. But they won't see anybody else in the other directory. They'll still only see the rest of the folks that they can. So that is the other super common question. And those are pretty much most of the common questions that we get over here. As you know, days go by. We'll certainly update this if we get more questions recurrently. But yeah, that's
All right, thank you both of you. I'm sure, as I said before, this will be very helpful to our viewers. We're running out of time, but before we go, I'd like to mention a few things. The first of being that might have gone under the radar for many of you is that by submitting a valid idea, an idea that gets approved, you will get a 1-year license for both Weavy and Widgemo, which I'm sure you can use in other projects. So that's just worth submitting the idea for, right? The other thing is that if you make it to the final, you will get a certificate to prove that you can handle Weavy and Widgemo. Just a small thing you could put on your CV if you're looking to fill it out or the like. And the last thing is that we have opened up for open innovation, in case you missed it. If you got an old project lying around, just bring it out at Weavy and Widgemo and maybe win some prizes while creating your own project. I think that's it. So everyone, don't forget to sign up. And if you got any other questions that we didn't cover today, you can head over to our Discord. You'll find the link below. And yeah, see you soon, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.